Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Azure Advent Calendar. My name is Alan Kinane. I'm an Azure technical consultant and solutions architect from Dublin, Ireland. My contact details are on the screen should you wish to get in touch. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Azure Web Apps. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that you'll need to host your app service is an app service plan. An app service plan is a PaaS service, so essentially it's a platform that you can build your web applications on. So it differs from a traditional infrastructure as a service setup where you've got a virtual machine to deploy, and then you need to deploy the web server roles such as IIS server, and then start setting up your application. Because it's a PaaS service, most of that is managed by Microsoft. So you basically decide if you want it to be a Windows or Linux platform. You deploy the service. Microsoft then manage the stuff under the covers. You therefore just have to look after the code and the settings, so you can get to work much quicker, and there's a lot less maintenance going on because Microsoft manage the patching and the security updates for that service. So what is an app service plan really? Well, under the covers, it's still running on virtual machines. The difference here is that Microsoft are now managing those virtual machines for you. And as I said, they're maintaining those and patching those and keeping them up to date. The environment is multi-tenanted, so the network backends, the front-end ARs, the routing, all that stuff is handled for you by Microsoft. Now your applications are still isolated from one another, but if you want full control over the network environment and the setup to be 100% isolated, you'd have to deploy this in an isolated tier plan. I'll talk about that more in a moment. So the servers are deployed and managed by Microsoft. You decide how many servers you want on your plan, so you can have a single instance or you can have multiple instances depending on the plan tier that you choose. You can have more instances than some of the lower end ones. You get to control the scaling, so you can manually scale the plan to a higher plan, so a better spec of VMs, so that's called scaling up, putting in more powerful VMs. Or you can scale it out, and that's adding more instances. And you can scale in as well. You don't have to only go out. You can scale things back in, and you can reduce the sizes of plans. The only limitation there really is some of the plans have more features than other ones. So if you have turned on some settings such as, for example, custom domain names, if you want to scale that down to a free app service plan, you won't be able to do that because that feature is just not supported on that tier. And you can also configure auto-scaling, which is a really useful feature of Azure Web Apps, being able to have your application scale based on either a schedule or on metrics, such as if your CPU is hitting, say, 90% for 5 minutes or longer, you can automatically have that scale out to another instance. Okay, so sizing the plans. Let's talk about some of the different tiers that are available. So there are a number of tiers to choose from. There's a free tier, and that is actually free 100%. One of the main limitations, however, on that free tier is that you only get 60 compute minutes per day. Outside of that, it just shuts down. So this is fine if you're testing some basic applications and settings, but you can't do very much with it. You get no custom domain names, no SSL, no auto scaling. So it's pretty basic. Next up is a shared tier. That's a little bit better than free, but you still have limitations on it, such as no SSL. Your compute time is still limited, but now to 240 minutes per day. And the next tier is the basic tier. And this is pretty decent for testing. I would never recommend this for production deployments, but for testing it's fine. Still lacking in some features such as auto scaling, deployment slots, backup. But if you just want to test your code, this is perfectly fine. And the next tier is standard. Now, as a minimum, I would say go with the standard tier for anything in production. The standard tier supports most of the features you'll need, such as SSL, custom domains, VNet integration, should you need it. It's always on, so you don't get limited to a set number of compute minutes per day. You've got deployment slots. We'll be talking about those later on, don't worry. Backup supported, and possibly most importantly, auto scaling. So you can auto scale on the standard tier plan. Next up is premium. Premium basically just gives you more powerful VMs. They're actually DV2 series VMs as opposed to A series, which will be on the lower end plans. So you get more power on the premium plans. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the isolated tier. So that's if you need your own isolated environments, which is called an app service environment. So you need to have full control over your own network environment, for example. This is quite often a requirement for PCI DSS compliance. You may have to use the isolated tier for that. Just as an example here, so I mentioned the standard tier, it's pretty commonly used for production deployments. There's a few different sizes there of instances, so you can go to an S1, S2, or S3, and as you can see, the specs there increase, and the higher up the instance size you go. So fairly common one I'd say is an S2 size, but the good thing is, as with most things in Azure, you can simply resize your app service plan whenever you need it. So if you need something more powerful, you can manually change that to a bigger size. You can even change that to a bigger plan. So if you want to go from a standard tier up to a premium tier, you can do that also. Just a sample architecture here. So we've got an app service plan deployed with 2 instances, and we've got multiple web applications running on an app service plan. So they're sharing the resources on those 2 instances in this example here. Taking that forward here now, if you want to have a test environment and a production environment, one of the things I recommend is not putting those both on the same app service plan. The reason being, if one of your test deployments spikes on CPU, it's going to bring down your production environment as well. So you ideally would want to keep those separate. So in this example here, we've got a separate app service plan for the test environment, just running on a single instance, and that might be just running on a basic plan just for testing features and functionality. And you got a couple of web applications running on that. But our production environment is running on a completely separate plan here, so completely separate resources and running on multiple instances as well for better load balancing and fault tolerance. And we've got a couple of production environments running there with our code pushed out from GitHub. Okay, so here we are now in the Azure portal. So let's get started by deploying an app service plan. I always prefer to get this deployed first as its own resource before I start adding any web apps to it. So let's do the usual and get our resource group deployed. I'm going to choose the North Europe region because that's where I'm based. As you can see here, you have to choose your operating system. So again, all of your web apps will run on this app service plan, so you can't mix and match Linux and Windows web apps on the same plan. You have to choose one or the other. If you need to use a mix of both, you just use separate plans. So I'm going to stick with Windows here. Give this a name. And then we just need to choose the size of our plan. So I've mentioned the different options available here. By default, it will go to production S1 size, which is actually the one we're going to use. But just to have a quick recap, if we click on Dev Test, it'll suggest some different price tiers here. So this is the free F1 size, this is the shared D1, and this is the basic B1 size. And if you click on the different sizes, you'll see they have different features. So the shared tier will support custom domains. The basic will support custom domains and SSL. It will allow you to manually scale, but not auto scale, and it doesn't support things like backup and so on. And there's different options in there as well, different sizes. On the production tier then, as you can see, these standard tier options have a lot more features supported here, such as backup, deployment slots, support for traffic manager, premium tiers here. Isolated. To deploy an isolated tier plan, you need to create an app service environment. So that's a fully isolated environment for that particular tier. We're just going to go with the production S1 size. That's perfect for what we're doing today. So let's just choose that. And then we'll just review and create that app service plan. It's pretty quick to deploy. It shouldn't take too long at all. So once that app service plan is deployed, we'll have a look at some of the settings we can configure on the app service plan, and then we'll go in and start configuring our app services. So that's deployed now already. So I have an app service plan deployed. Metrics will start to come in a few minutes. So again, because this is essentially the platform, the virtual machines that are running our service, this is where we'll see our CPU, memory metrics, and other things there as well. So just have a quick look here. So if we have, or once we have apps deployed, they'll appear here. We haven't deployed any actual web apps yet. File system storage. Well, the standard tier plan comes with 50 gigs of storage. Some of the bigger tiers have more storage. You can always use storage accounts as well. So if you want to put some of your code or files that you need to run your application in a storage account, just reference them directly, that's absolutely fine. That's what a lot of people do anyway. But you have 50 gigs of storage included in this particular plan. As you can see, we haven't actually used any of it yet. In terms of networking, it's limited enough in what we can do on this tier, but we can integrate it with a virtual network. Now, we don't have any virtual networks deployed, but if we did and we had, say, some virtual machines running on those VNets, we could integrate the two services. Now, note, it's only for outbound from the app service. So if you need to talk to your virtual machines outbound, you can do that. It doesn't work the other way around. And if you've got VMs deployed on premises or in other environments, if you have those connected via VPN, so if you have your virtual network connected to your on-premise via a virtual network gateway, you can reach out to those using this VNet integration as well. And hybrid connections is a useful one if you have something in your private network. So again, something on your on-premises network, like maybe a database server that you need to integrate with this application. You can set that up without going down the VPN route. So essentially, this is an agent that will be deployed on your on-premises network that will create a connection to your app service over port 443. So you don't need a VPN tunnel. You don't need to open any ports. You just need this agent installed in your on-premises environment, and then you can integrate that system with your app service. But again, it's outbound from your app service to the hybrid connection. We spoke a little about scaling, so let's have a look at that now. Scaling up, that's basically changing your plan. So if you remember, we're on the S1 plan. We decided, okay, we've only got 1.75 gigs of RAM on this plan. We need a bit more, so we could just select the S2 size and just simply apply that. Or if we decided, no, let's actually go to a completely different tier. Let's go to the premium tier. We need a lot more power. Again, it's the same process. Click on that and apply it. So as I said, the only thing to be careful of here is if you have set up some features here, like maybe auto scaling, for example, and you decided, well, I want to save a bit of money and just go into a cheaper plan like the basic tier. Because auto scaling is not supported on the basic plan, if you try to apply that, it will simply fail because you've set up some features that are not supported. Scaling out. So this is very, very useful and very important for app services. So you can simply manually scale. So we've just deployed a single instance to start with, basically one machine running this. Good practice is to always, if you can afford it, have at least two instances. So you're load balancing automatically between the two instances, and you've got that fault tolerance built in if one instance goes down for whatever reason. On this particular tier, you can go up to a maximum of 10 instances. If you want to go higher, you'd have to go up to the premium tier. So we could set that to 2 instances and click save. And we'll, before very long, have 2 instances running. But probably what you want to look at really is auto scaling. So auto scaling is being able to scale on demand, and you can do that either on a schedule basis. So if you know you've got particularly busy times of the day or of the year, you can set a schedule up to auto scale it. But more commonly, auto scaling is set up on metrics. So as an example here, we've got well, let's say we want to have a minimum of 2 instances at all times. Normally set the default the same, and we want to be able to scale up, but we don't want it to go beyond 5 instances because that's as much as our budget allows for. So we want it to always be between 2 and 5 instances. But how then do we determine how the scaling works, what the metrics are involved? Well, we need to add rules to do that. So let's add a rule now. I think we'll just use the default rule here. So the default rule that's here is based on the average CPU percentage being used. And it says if the CPU is greater than 70% for a duration of 10 minutes, then we're going to increase the count by 1. So that's the number of instances. The number of instances is going to increase by 1 if these conditions are met. This is an important one, the cooldown minutes. What that does is it waits a period of time. So because it's going to scale up to 3 instances in this case, we want it to wait at least 5 minutes, or maybe that should be 10 minutes really, before it scales again, because otherwise you'll have a condition known as flapping, where it's just constantly going to be scaling well, up in this case, but it could be potentially scaling up and then scaling back down again within a few minutes every single time. And that's not really going to have any impact at all. In fact, it might make things worse for your end users. So it's good to make it wait a little bit of time before it checks and scales again. So let's just add that rule now. Okay, we've got that rule added. I would recommend adding further rules. CPU is one thing. You can also do it on RAM, other things like how many hits, connections your website's getting, that sort of thing. But let's add a scale in rule as well, because this is great. It'll make it scale up, and it may scale up to 3 or 4 or even 5 instances, but it's not going to scale back in again unless we put in a rule for that. So let's add another rule here. So the metric should be the same, so it should be average CPU. But we need to change the logic on it, so it needs to be set to less than, and it's not good to use the same percentage here, so maybe we should go maybe 60%. So when it's less than 60%, so it's dropped down again, it's not so busy, it's less than 60% for same, let's say 10 minutes, but this time we want to decrease the count by 1 instance. And again, let's wait for 10 minutes. We'll see we've now got a scale out and scale in metric here. This will scale it out by 1 if the CPU is over 70% for 10 minutes. And this will scale it back in again afterwards, after it drops down to under 60%. So let's just make sure we save that. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. We've got usual things like our Resource Explorer. And we can set up our monitoring alerts, which you should do, by the way. And look at our metrics for the service. So again, we can look at our CPU average consumption. Again, we won't see anything yet because we've just provisioned the service, but the usual things you should be setting up and saving to your dashboards, etc. So now we've got an app service plan. Let's deploy an application. So if we click on App Services, and you're going to note here, the service is called App Service, but even if you add that, oh look, the name's changed to Web App. And this causes a lot of confusion for people. The names are effectively interchangeable. It's a web application running on an app service plan, but web apps in Azure are quite often referred to as app services because they're not necessarily just web applications. They can be used for REST APIs and other things as well. I prefer to just refer to them as web apps. It's just easier to work with, I think. So let's just select our resource group here. Now we have to choose an instance name here, and you'll see this is a prefix name. You're going to get given a .azurewebsites.net suffix. So this name has to be globally unique, similar to storage accounts. So I'm going to call it Azure Advent Cal. I'll just put my initials at the end. Hopefully it's available. Yes, it is. Perfect. That can be a code or a Docker container. So we're just going to use this, the code type here. It's just going to be a runtime. You have a lot of different options here. These can be changed later on. There's a huge number of options here. It's not really relevant for what I'm going to deploy, but I'm just going to choose the new .NET Core 3.0. Here you choose your operating system. I mentioned before, this has to match your app service plan. So just to note here, by default, it's looking to create an app service plan here. I already created one. I just need to fix my region, which is here. There we go. So now it's selected my app service plan that I want to deploy this to. And as you see, Windows is selected. If I choose Linux, it's not going to let me apply that. It's trying to create a new plan. So as I said, it has to match the app service plan. And as you can see, it's picked up the standard S1 size. So that's everything there that I need. Application Insights is definitely something I would recommend. I'm not going to be covering this today. I believe there's a video in the Azure Advent Calendar on the 15th of December about Application Insights. This is really if you want to monitor your application and how it's interacting with your infrastructure, troubleshooting, all that kind of really good stuff. I would definitely say turn this on, even if you don't know how to use it. it's something that you will likely need at some point. So you can create an application insights plan there. We'll leave that on by default. Let's just review, make sure our settings are all as we want. We'll create our first web app. And again, this won't take very long at all. The app service plan is already deployed, so this is really just creating the web application on that app service plan. Once deployed, then effectively we can start configuring some settings, get our code up there and get our web application up and running as quickly as possible. There we go, that's deployed. So let's have a look and see what we have here. So the overview is actually quite useful. You can see some important settings here. This is your URL as assigned by Microsoft. So as you can see, it's taken the name of the app service that we decided to use, just appended that to the Azure Websites.net. We can actually click on that. You can see there's our website with a default page up and running. So let's start taking a look at some of the settings here, and let's start with configuration and see what's available to us here. Okay, so you might be familiar with a lot of these settings from various web services such as IIS. You've got your application settings here. Here is a very important one, connection strings. So you're probably going to be linking this to a database system of some kind. You can actually create your connection strings right here in the configuration settings. It's very, very useful indeed. What else have we got here now at the top? If we go to general settings, here you can change your code stack to something else, what platform your application's running on. If you want to enable FTP, for example, HTTP versions, WebSockets, always on. So if you want your application to sleep when you're not using it, you can set that up here. Various debugging options. Very important one here, default documents. So some defaults in there already, but if you want to add your own, very easy to do that. And then path mappings. If you want to set up your own mappings there, you can do so. We've also got options to turn on authentication here. So if you want to integrate this with other providers, you can see there's a few listed there. So you've got Twitter and Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Azure Active Directory, something that you might want to configure for your application. I mentioned application insights, so I've enabled that. I won't be covering that today, but your application insights will be available through here. If you want to use managed identity, that can be set up through this as well. Backups may not be something you need if all of your data is on a database and this is just code essentially. You may not need to back this up, but if you wish to, you can. Essentially how that works is you just have to create a storage account. So it does not use Recovery Services Vault. You'll have to create a storage account and then set up a backup schedule. You can decide how often you want to back it up and then how long you want to keep the backups for. Fairly straightforward. If you want to, you can actually include your database backup in here as well. Now that may have its own separate backup, but if you want to just integrate that with your web application backup, that can be done here also. Okay, let's look at custom domains. This is something you're likely to want to use. So let's add a custom domain now. This is one I've actually set up earlier, so let's just validate this. What you see here is you need to create a CNAME record on your DNS registrar, as outlined here. If you're mapping a naked domain, so without the www part, you actually have to create an A record as well. But we'll just use this one. So I've already set up this record, so if I click validate, that should confirm that it's been set up already, so it has. One thing I've seen a lot of people, including myself, forget to do is just because you validate, you have to still click this add custom domain button. So once you get all the green ticks here, make sure to click this button. And our domain gets added here now. And you'll see a warning because it's not set up with an SSL certificate. We'll come to that in a moment. But just to show you this in action, if we go back to the Overview tab, we should see our URL has changed to that custom domain here. Now let's just click on that, see if it works. Yes, it does. So we've been able to browse using our custom domain, but it's not yet encrypted with SSL. So let's look at that now. There's various SSL options. You can require HTTPS, which is a good idea nowadays. You can set the TLS version, but let's look at the certificates. So how do we get our certificates? Well, if you have a certificate already, you can import it. You can actually purchase certificates directly in the Azure portal if you want. Something that's come out very recently is this new option, App Service Managed Certificates. So this is a free certificate from Microsoft. And note it's in preview. It's only been available for about a month now, but you can actually get a free certificate from Microsoft. The last I checked, they expire after 6 months, but then you can just renew them. But this is a really great free feature, great add-on from Microsoft. Note it only works with subdomains, so it won't work with a naked domain name. So I've got a subdomain here, www in front, so that's eligible. I can actually create that certificate now. This process is fairly quick. It's just creating that certificate based on that domain name. And once that certificate is created, we just need to bind it then to our app service. So let's just wait for this to finish. Okay, there's my certificate created. Now note you cannot export the certificate, so if you're using, for example, an application gateway, you cannot use this certificate. You need your own certificate for that. But just for app services, this is perfect. So what we need to do next is bind it. So we can actually do that here if we go to bindings. And then we can just create a binding. So we're going to bind that custom domain we added to the certificate we created. And let's just create an SNI SSL type. Add that binding. Again, this shouldn't take too long. There we go. So our certificate is now bound. Let's just go back to custom domains. You can see that's now listed as secure because it's been bound to a certificate. Again, if we go back to overview, let's see what our URL looks like now. There we go, HTTPS, much better. Well, let's have a look at that now if we click on it. Come out of full screen mode for a second. As you can see, you've got HTTPS. We can have a look here at our certificate. As you can see, it's a 6-month certificate, but fully trusted, fully secure. Excellent. Right. What's next? Networking. Covered this already, but you'll see there's a few more options here now because you've deployed an app service, a web app. You have a few different options. So we mentioned that VNet integration options. We've got that hybrid connections option as well. There's an option here for configuring this with the Azure Front Door service, with the Azure Content Delivery Network. But this is one I think it's very important to talk about, access restrictions. So by default, this is not locked down. There's an allow all rule in there. If you want to put restrictions in here, you can create your own rules and then lock down based on IP addresses. So you can put in, again, if you're locking down this application to particular users, or if you're just testing, you can put in your own IP address block here and just make sure you've restricted access to it through that. And this can be done on the web app level. So if you've got multiple web applications deployed, you can restrict some of them and leave some of them fully open. We covered scaling already, but I just want to mention here we've already set up an auto scale rule. So as you can see, it's picked up the auto scaling rule here. So these auto scale rules will apply to every web app on that app service plan. Because it's set at the plan level, you can't specify different auto scale rules for different web apps. It's done on the app service plan level. So anytime you adjust this, if I adjust this here, it would adjust the settings for every app service on this plan. Next up, we have web jobs. So web jobs are for running scripts, batch tasks, background tasks that you want to run outside of the actual application. Now, one thing to note here is these run on the app service plan as well. So if you've got scripts here that run frequently or run for a long time, require a lot of processing power, that can affect the performance of your web apps because they're using that same app service plan, the same machines that everything runs on. There can be a performance impact on this. So potentially you might want to run your web jobs on a completely separate app service plan, or maybe use something else entirely, such as Azure Functions. But if it's just some simple tasks, you can just add a web job here. You can upload scripts that you've created already. The type can be set to continuous or triggered, so it can run on a triggered basis. You can set to run a schedule, so you can put in a cron expression, to run every 5 minutes or every 12 hours or whatever way you want it to run. But very useful if you need to run a script or a batch task that runs maybe a cleanup job or something. Very easy to set that up there. Fewer options here. You've got push notification options there for integration with web apps. You can actually run MySQL in-app, so you can run a small MySQL database on the same app service plan if you wish. I mean, that can be run outside the app service plan, of course, but just if you need a very small database that you want to provision that on the same app service plan, again, sharing the same resources, that can be set up and configured there as well. We've got information about our app service plan that we've covered already. Let's talk about some of the development tools here, what we can do here. So there's a clone option here. So if you basically just want to clone your application and settings, that can be done quite easily here. Note, it doesn't include all settings. It will take your application settings, connection strings, resources. What custom domains are not cloned, so things like your SSL bindings as well obviously would not be cloned. I believe the VNet settings are not cloned either, so some settings you may have to set up again, but useful if you are if you want to just create a copy basically of your web application. This is a very, very useful feature, the console. Look at this, now I've got access to my web server essentially, so you can do some basic tasks here and some basic troubleshooting steps as well, basic admin work. Very, very useful indeed. If you need to take that a step further, you can look at the advanced tools. This runs off Kudu, which is again deployed on the app service plan. So you can launch your Kudu environment here and look at various tools here. So this is useful for just having a look at your environment, some of your settings, connection strings. If you need to do debugging, you can bring up a command prompt or a PowerShell prompt. There's a process explorer in here, so you can see what tasks are running. You can click into those tasks and kill them if you need to. There's other tools in here as well for integrations with other services. Yeah, so a useful set of tools if you need to troubleshoot and debug your environment. This one, I only noticed recently, it's a preview feature of an app service editor. Now, we don't really have any code up there yet, but this is useful if you just need to make a quick change in the browser, essentially. And again, I would never recommend this for a production environment, but if you've got a test site up there and you possibly created a file and had a typo in there or something, just rather than syncing your code again, if you want to just make a quick change, you can actually get access to your code and make the change here. So we've just got that default start page there, but we could make a quick change to that if we wanted to and save that should we require it. So it could be useful. There's a performance tester as well, so you can actually do some basic stress testing on your environment, simulate what happens when you've got multiple users accessing it at the same time. So you can put in a user load and a period of time here and see how it performs, which is very useful. Got the Resource Explorer again. Extensions can be added. If you're doing APIs, be it for mobile applications, or REST APIs, whatever you need, there's some options for that there. And then the usual monitoring and alerting options that you should definitely be looking to configure for your app services. So let's come back to deploying our code. How is that done? Well, let's have a look at Deployment Center. So there's various means you can push your code or upload your code to your app service plan. So if you're using Azure DevOps, GitHub, local repositories, you can actually use things like OneDrive, Dropbox. You can always do the old-fashioned route of FTP. If you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, you can actually push your code directly from that. And that's what we're going to do now, in fact. Okay, so here I am in Visual Studio Code. This is a fantastic program that I think most people working in Azure are using to some capacity nowadays. So I have a very, very simple web application or website that I'm just going to upload here. So I have already integrated Visual Studio Code with my Azure account, and I've installed the extension for app services. So if I click onto this now, it should find any app services I've got deployed. So there it is. There's the one I've deployed in my Azure subscription already. So what I want to do is push my code to that. So I can simply right click on that and go deploy to web app. I just need to select my folder that I want to push to it. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I am. As you can see, it is pushing the code. It actually zips it up into a package and pushes that code directly to the app service. So I don't even need to log into the Azure portal to do that. And I can do it directly from Visual Studio Code. That's done. I even get a browse link here, so I can actually browse directly to it from here. And there you go. There's my very simple website launched. As you can see, it's got the URL and it's encrypted under SSL as well. So there's my first website deployed. And yeah, that was pretty easy, wasn't it? So let's see if I want to make some changes to that. Well, I actually have a version 2 of that available and ready to go, but I don't want to push it directly to my production environment just yet. I want to show you another way you can do that. So we're going to look at something called deployment slots. And this is another really great feature of Azure Web Apps. You can actually create a separate slot here. So as you can see, I've got one slot here by default, and that's my production slot. But I want to make a pre-production slot. So my staging slot, essentially. So I want to push some code into a staging slot and have a look at that and see how it all looks before I actually make it live. So I'll call it pre-production. You can clone your settings here. So if you've got things like connection strings and so on set up, you can clone all those settings from one slot to another. I don't have any of that set up, so I'll just skip that for now. Let's just create that new slot. And this essentially creates almost like another web app on this app service plan with its own set of settings. We'll see in a moment how that looks. Okay, that's deployed. So I've got my slot here. One thing you can do, this is quite an interesting feature as well. As you can see, my traffic is all going to the production slot, but if you maybe were looking at testing a new feature and you wanted maybe 10% of your users to go on to the new version of the website and the web application to test that feature, you could actually do that. You'd actually specify, so 10% of your web traffic goes to this slot and the remainder goes to that one. So it's a way you can experiment with new features and see how it's working without actually sending all of your users to that. So we'll just leave that as it is. We don't want to send some of our traffic there. But let's just click on the pre-production slot that we've created. Just have a look at the name here. So we've got a new app service slot here. As you can see, this has now got its own URL. Again, if we click on that, we should see the default page appear because there's no code uploaded to that just yet. But this has its own set of configuration settings. So again, if we wanted to, for example, maybe restrict access to this because we only want the in-house testing team to have a look at this pre-production slot, but the other slot needs to be available to the public. So we can restrict this slot only and leave the other one unaffected. Likewise, we can set up our own configuration settings, our own separate connection strings, whatever we want to do. You can do deployment specific connection strings if you want. Whatever we want to set up in here just for this slot can be configured that way. So let's push our code update to this slot. And we can do that the same way in Visual Studio Code. So if I go back here, I've actually got a version 2 of my website with some fancy JavaScript and a few other bits and pieces in there. So yeah, let's push that out. So to do that, we just need to make sure we select the slot. So the slot is actually contained within the app service under deployment slots. This should now find there's our pre-production slot there. So again, I can just simply right click on that slot and make sure you choose deploy to slot. Again, it's going to ask me, I want to choose the folder, the version 2. I'm going to deploy that. And in just a moment, we should have that code pushed out to our new slot, and then we can start doing our testing. Deployment successful. Just wait for that to finish. There we go. So let's browse. And again, this is not using the live URL. It's just a separate pre-production slot URL. But let's have a look at that, see how it looks. Open the link. Oh, that's a bit nicer, isn't it? Yeah, I like that. Okay, so once we're happy with our code changes, how do we make that live? I remember from years ago, the old way of doing this was FTPing onto the live production server, and then if you spotted an issue, you had to roll things back, usually using FTP again, which was not a nice way to do it. But it's much easier with deployment slots. Let's have a look now. So if we go back to our deployment slots, we've got our production, which is the old version 1. We've got our version 2 up there now. We're happy to put that live. So all we need to do is swap the slots around. Just click on the swap button. This will confirm you're swapping the pre-production into the target. This will actually swap the connection strings application settings as well. So unless you've set up slot specific settings, so if I had a connection string on my live production app service, that would be swapped into the slot. So when the slot goes live, that would now have the live production database, but you can set that up in different ways. So let's just swap those. I don't have any of those settings configured. It's just basic code for me. I want to swap those around. So now my version 2 and the pre-production slot will be moved to the production slot, and my production slot will still be there, but it'll now be in the pre-production slot. The good thing about this is if I find, oh no, there's a problem, I need to roll this back, I simply just swap the slots back again. So my old version 1 will be back in production. And it's as simple as doing this exact process again, just swapping the slots a second time. Very, very easy to do. No messing around with FTP and copying files up and changing settings manually. Okay, that's done. Close that link. So let's check back on our overview. So we're still in the pre-production slot. Let's just go back to our main app service. So this is our custom URL. This should now be the version 2. Let's check. Yes, it is. So that's now live. Simple as that. And just to show you, I think I still have the pre-production slot open. If I refresh this, it should be my old version 1 page. And it is. So that's there. So I could roll that back now if I needed to. So one more thing I just wanted to talk about before I wrap up is monitoring and troubleshooting. So obviously you can set up your usual Azure Monitor alerts and metrics, and I'd absolutely advise to do that. But if you go here to diagnose and solve problems, there's some really great tools in here for monitoring your web applications and giving you suggestions for things you can do to improve performance. Just take a quick look at some of these. So there's an availability and performance option here. This will have a look at your app service performance now. I don't have very many metrics yet because it's only been running for a very short time, but it will have a look at your environment, look at the things like the CPU usage and memory usage. So that will help you to look at deciding if you need to set up things like auto scaling, as we discussed. And you can drill it down into specific things like, is my web application running slow? It'll actually do some checks on that to determine how it's been running. So far so good. Again, it's only been running a short time, but all good so far by the looks of things. That's great. What else have we got here? We've got configuration settings and changes, SSL, domain settings, best practice settings, again, for things like auto scaling, using things like Traffic Manager. For developers, this is quite a good one, Navigator. This allows you to track your code changes and your dependencies. We click on this, and this is a service you will have to enable in the portal, and it can be enabled here. But once enabled, then it will log all your code changes and updates and can help you to troubleshoot any issues that may have arisen as a result of a code change. So I would definitely say have a look at these tools. They will certainly help you, and absolutely make sure you use application insights as well to get more in-depth metrics and insights into how your application is working and how it all fits together. So that just about sums up what I've got for you today on Azure Web Apps. I hope you found it useful. It's a really, really good service. One of my favorites actually in Azure. Just to give a quick shout out to Gregor and Richard for organizing the Azure Advent Calendar. It's a really, really good event, and a fantastic response from the Azure community. There's been some great videos posted already so far, so I've learned a lot from it already, and I hope I've added to that today. If you've any questions for me, if you want to reach out, my blog is www.azurealan.ie, and you'll find me on Twitter at Azure_Alan. So with that, thank you very much and have a happy Christmas.